وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم وأكمل التحيات على سيد السادات سيدنا ونبينا محمد خير البريات، وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on the Tariqa al-Muhammadiyya, in which we are looking at this great manual of Taqwa, Imam Birgivi's manual on the path of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Tariqa al-Muhammadiyya, the Muhammadan path. We've been looking at the section on acquiring taqwa and beginning with the taqwa of the heart. And we have reached riya, showing off, right? And showing off or insincerity is one of the most destructive of vices, because after disbelief and its expressions and causes, and then we have misguidance and its causes. If someone is neither a disbeliever nor misguided, then their success is dependent on the soundness of their actions. And the soundness of their actions is governed by the soundness of their intentions. And what affects the soundness of one's intentions? Nothing affects it like insincerity and showing off, riya. Right? Because insincerity and showing off are this idea of riya is the opposite of sincerity. And without sincerity, actions are dead. Without sincerity, actions are dead. Al-a'malu suwarun qa'ima. Actions are lifeless, meaningless forms whose life-giving spirit is the secret of sincerity within them. Whose life-giving spirit, as Ibn Ata'illah tells us, is the subtle reality, the secret of sincerity within them. So, our salvation is dependent on being sincere and shielding ourselves from insincerity and its expressions. So it's something to take with urgency and to consider salvifically critical, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So we looked at the definition of sincerity, of insincerity, riya, as being طلب الدنيا بعمل الآخرة, is seeking worldly benefit, directly or indirectly, through next worldly actions. Those actions that are primarily done for the next life. That is the sinful, the directly sinful insincerity. And we will see today that there are two types of insincerity. Right? There's riya ahl al-deen and riya ahl al-dunya. There's worldly insincerity, and so there's religious insincerity and worldly insincerity. Right? And we'll see that the directly sinful insincerity is in matters of religion, which we said are your acts of devotion, your seeking or spreading of religious knowledge, or the acts of religious service to others. Those are the direct expressions. The religious devotions are not just your acts of worship, but those things that are primarily done to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So we'll see, and we'll be seeing that further. So Imam al-Birgivi rahimahullah tells us, وَقَدْ يُطْلَقُ الرِّيَاء عَلَى حُبِّ الْمَنْزِلَةِ. Insincerity can sometimes be used to refer to love of status. وَقَصْدِهَا فِي قُلُوبِ النَّاسِ, and seeking, status and praise and prestige in the hearts of people. بِأَعْمَالِ الدُّنْيَا, in worldly actions. So you can say, so and so is showing off with their car, for example. That's riya. So that's riya ahli dunya. Right? وَهَذَا رِيَاءُ أَهْلِ الدُّنْيَا, and this is the showing off of worldly people. وَالْأَوَّلِ بِقِسْمَيْهِ, and the first with both its categories, which is رِيَاءُ أَهْلِ الدِّينِ. The first with both its categories is the showing off, the insincerity of religious people. Right? Which is to seek worldly gain with next worldly actions themselves, or to seek worldly gain through the things that are the means of religious actions, or to manifest that to others. Right? Right? فالقسم الأول إن لم يقارنه نفع إرادة النفع الآخرة فهو رياء محض. So the first, which is when you do if you do a religious act itself for a worldly purpose, right? If not connected with some next worldly benefit, is pure insincerity. Such as what? You're amongst religious people, so you're like, I want to look religious too. So you prayed 2 rak'ahs simply to gain something with them, which is for them to praise you. Right? This applies to acts of worship, but it also applies to a lot of things that people do that they don't consider is showing off, right? Such as what? For example, there's a number of religious projects that are together and they're having a meeting with the mayor. And let's say they've set up a fund to support non-profits in challenging times. So you'd like to be one of the speakers just in order to so you want to say a word about how Islam views tests and trials. But your driving intention is what? Simply that if I impress these people, I'll get, it'll secure funding for my project, it'll secure funding for covering my salary. If that's the driving intention, if that is the intention, and what's the test of intention? It's الباعث المباشر على العمل. What drove you to do it? Such that if that wasn't there, would you have done it? So this is tricky. Right? In religion, in your acts of devotion, or your acts of seeking or spreading knowledge, or in your religious service. Right? People seek out the prominent or the wealthy, like, people seek out honey, like ants or whatever creatures go after honey. Right? Why? One has to check one's intention, right? Because worldly means are necessary, but they can never be the end. But what if the intention is mixed? Right? وَإِنْ قَارَنَتْهُ فَرِيَاءُ تَخْلِيطٍ. Right? If these kinds of actions are accompanied by so you're seeking worldly benefit, but also religious benefit. This is a mixed intention. Takhliq, right? Because acts of devotion are only accepted purely for the sake of Allah. Acts of seeking or spreading knowledge are only accepted purely for the sake of Allah. Acts of religious service are only accepted when they are purely for the sake of Allah. Right? And right? And this can be إما غالب أو مساو أو مغلوب فالجملة خمسة. Right? So if it's mixed, so they could be a pure intention. You could have a pure intention for religious benefit, or you could have a purely worldly intention, or you could have a religious intention with an admixture of worldly intention, or the two could be balanced, or the worldly gain could predominate. So there's 5 possibilities. So what do you have to do? Right? We live in a world of means, right? And this applies to seeking knowledge. For example, a student, they research something, they found a benefit. Why are you telling your teacher? Are you doing it for worldly gain? You want them to be pleased with you. Is that deen? No. Is it deen or no? It can be with its intention, but it's dangerous. So one has to make a pure intention for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لا سلام إلا بإخلاص النية. There's no safety except with sincerity of intention. So you're telling another how? You put that by doing this, I am seeking the pleasure of Allah. How? How do you seek the pleasure of Allah? By telling your teacher that, yes, I looked that up. Firstly, one has the intention of expressing gratitude to tahadduth bin ni'mah, by expressing gratitude for the blessing, by bringing happiness to the teacher or the parent's heart, by wafa bil wa'd, by fulfilling a promise that one made. If one's teacher asked one, can you look this up? You said yes. What happens? That counts as a promise, does it not? And fulfilling a promise, but you can only fulfill a promise if you tell them. And fulfilling a promise is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Bringing happiness, if one is doing it because, let's say, the teacher wanted something looked up, so you need to be in service to one's teachers. Right? For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But all these good intentions can become worldly. Right? So what happens? Because if one's not careful about one's intentions, they strangle one. How? Student is doing well. So what happens? A teacher says, can someone look something up? They look it up, they tell the teacher, I did it. One, this is pride. Pride, it can lead to inward qualities of harm, but then the teacher keeps going to them because they do it. But now they get closer and closer to the teacher, not considering the pleasure of Allah. Then they start becoming a gatekeeper for the teacher, and this and that, and all kinds of harmful things. Right? So this is why this is very, very tricky. But also when one reads classical books, the point isn't just to rush through the book, just to pause and to look at the implications of these things. Right? والمراد منه إما يعني والمراد منه نفع الدنيا Can you read the عبارة, Imam? Right? And what is sought from the worldly benefit is either the creator or creation. What's sought وَالْمُرَادُ مِنْهُ نَفْعُ الدُّنْيَا إِمَّا خَالِقٌ أَوْ مَخْلُوقٌ. What you seek the worldly benefit for is either the creator or the creation. Right? Right? What's the implication? That what you seek the worldly benefit from is either the creator or creation. Even in religious matters. Right? That let's say you are fundraising. Right? This is a tricky thing. You are fundraising for your educational project, your community project. Everyone in the project has to keep in mind, why are we doing this? And say, yeah, of course it's for Allah. No. The intention has to come first. Right? That the project is a wasila, is a means. This effort is a means. Al-maqsood innama huwa Allah. What is sought is but Allah. And when the means become the end, that is the beginning of harm creeping in. Right? And likewise, in one's worldly actions, one's devotional actions, one has to be very careful. Right? وَنَفْعُ الدُّنْيَا إِمَّا جَاهٌ. And worldly benefit is either status, أو مال, or wealth, أو قضاء شهوة, or the fulfillment of a desire. Right? أو دفع ضرر يسير, or to ward off slight harm. It says, ward off slight harm because you have a right to ward off grave harm, right? You want comfort, right? And these worldly benefits, right, which are status or wealth or fulfilling of desires or to ward off harms, things are difficult. Like someone has a small salary, so now I say, look, I need to have a social media presence. Why? So that more people recognize me. So I can make some more money on the side, along with my position is in whatever, I can make some more money on the side. The worldly benefit is either jah, status and recognition, or wealth, or fulfilling of desires. What's on your mind is if I do this, someone says I'll be able to find a wife. If it's purely for the carnal side, it's a physical desire. Desire for worldly things, or to ward off harm, the harm of poverty. Slight. I want to have, more financial security, etc. وَكُلٌّ مِّنْهُمَا وَكُلٌّ مِّنْهَا. And all of these, إِمَّا لِلتَّوَسُّلِ بِهِ إِلَى عَمَلِ الْآخِرَةِ. All of these could either be as a means to some religious action, to some next worldly actions, أو لا. Right? right? So these can be diagrammed in a very complex way, but we don't want to overcomplicate it. So each of these matters, right, could be as a means to next worldly benefit or not. Wal-awwal, right? And the first of these, which is to seek some worldly benefit as a means to next worldly benefit, and there's many different possibilities, and you're seeking it from the Creator, is not showing off. How? Let's say you say, okay, there's a job opening, right? There's a job opening at a local religious institute, right? You don't have a job, so you say, look, I can get this job, material benefit. It pays a secure salary. This worldly benefit, right? If I have, so you say, let me apply. But this salary, there's many possibilities why you're doing it. It could be purely for the sake of, this is a worldly benefit, there's a salary. It could be, there's these 5 possibilities for it, right? It could be purely for the sake of Allah, or mixed and the next worldly intention is predominant, or next worldly intention could be balanced, or the worldly intention is predominant, or it could be purely for a worldly reason. But if you're seeking it from Allah, it's not riya, right? If that's the intention. And that's where safety is, right? First and foremost in religious works, but also in other things. That job, the masjid is hiring, the Islamic Center is hiring a managing director. It's not just a job, that is religious service. The Muslim charity is hiring an operations director, a marketing director. That is religious work. And that's where so much ruin happens in communities and in our ummah, right? People do religious work with predominant, with either purely worldly intentions or predominant worldly intentions or mixed intentions. And all of them bring degrees of harm, either immediately or gradually, but surely. Right? So if that worldly benefit is sought from the sake of Allah, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It's not showing off. It's not insincerity. Right? There's an opening for an Imam position. You apply. It pays well. But harrir niyatak. Make your intention purely for the sake of Allah. And multiply your intention. Right? That okay, I will accept this work, but you make your intention for the sake of Allah, and then reflect deeply how I multiply my intentions to make it truly pleasing to Allah. Right? To seek the pleasure of Allah. How? By one doing the job. Right? So you're going to be, and this applies to religious work. How? Yeah, don't just say, okay, this is a good job, alhamdulillah, that gives me security. If you're not harming yourself now by having insincere motives, this is going to play out again and again. You get paid monthly every month. Every time you spend, every time you think of your budget, there's creeping insincerity, and you'll become a worldling. But if you enter, and that's why, as Ibn Ata'illah says, Man ashraqat bidayatuhu ashraqat nihayatuhu. Whoever's beginning is illumined, their end is illumined. Where's the beginning? In the intention. Innamal a'malu binniyat. Our actions are by their intentions. When you enter into an action, if you begin with a sincere intention, and then you sustain a sincere intention, and when tested, you preserve a sincere intention, then you will find وَأَنَّ سَعْيَهُ سَوْفَ يُرَى. Then their striving will be beheld. in light and benefit and reward and gain and fruits in this life and eternally in the next. Okay. So you intend, I'm seeking the pleasure of Allah through this action and then you think, whatever action it is. So if we start with religious work, right? To be Imam of a masjid, right? How? By seeking the pleasure of Allah, by leading people in prayer, by teaching people for the sake of Allah. All these intentions, right? What are the ways you're going to benefit people? Each of those are, so the intention, there is one sincere intention. This is for Allah. How? Consider the work itself. What are you doing in it? Each of those for Allah. Right? That's where multiple intentions are. Multiple intentions are, how will I seek the pleasure of Allah through this? But the sincere intention is one. Lillahi Rabbil Alameen. But then the question begs itself, how? So from the work itself. And then what arises from the work? Okay, but I can provide for myself. For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How? By fulfilling the rights my family has over me. For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By being able to spend from the halal for the sake of Allah, by being able to give in charity for the sake of Allah, to be able to spend on those who have rights over me for the sake of Allah, to be able to shield myself from having to ask others for the sake of Allah. And all of these become rewarding intentions. Also to be able to dedicate myself for the sake of Allah. Right? I was told by one of my teachers when I was coming back to North America that make your work into a job for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because it is better to dedicate, if you're in a situation, to be able to dedicate yourself fully to something and to be able to benefit far more widely than say, well, I'll just earn a living and do a little bit. So because we're not in a time when just little amounts of religious work are sufficient. The needs are wide and great. And it's not feasible to fulfill the community's needs by scholars and teachers working full time in worldly occupations, because the nature of worldly occupations now is you have to give them 125%. So when will you be able to really fulfill community service of teaching and spreading knowledge and guidance? And similarly, there's need for Muslim activists, etc., some of them, to dedicate themselves 100% to the building of our religious and community institutions of religious services, social services, other support services, but with sincerity. Right? That's one of the things, to be able to dedicate myself fully to this, to be freed up for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are examples from the Sharia where you can seek worldly benefits from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's not insincere. So he says, لِوُرُودِ صَلَاةِ الْإِسْتِسْقَاءِ, because the prayer of seeking rain has come. Right? What are we seeking from Salat al-Istisqa, the prayer of seeking rain? We're seeking rain. Right? Rain is a worldly benefit. But whom are we seeking it from? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's not sincere. But the safety in it is, I'm praying Salat al-Istisqa to seek the pleasure of Allah by asking Allah for rain. Wal-Istikhara, and the Salat al-Istikhara, we're asking Allah, we're seeking guidance. We're seeking to be guided to what's good for us. It could be a religious matter. Wal-Haja, and the prayer of need. We are asking, but because we are asking Allah, these are not insincere. وَنَحْوِهَا. Right? Teaching others. Right? Teaching others for pay. Right? Counts from that. Right? It's a worldly benefit, but all of these require serious checking of intention. Right? That's why Al-Hasan al-Basri said these words. Imam al-Ghazali mentions it in his Kitab al-Ilm. And it's also mentioned by others. It's mentioned in the biographies of Al-Hasan al-Basri in a whole range of sources. It's mentioned in the works that transmit the sayings of the Salaf with its appropriate chains of transmission, that Al-Hasan al-Basri said, عُقُوبَةُ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ مَوْتُ الْقَلْبِ. The punishment for the people of knowledge is the death of hearts. And they asked, how is that? He said, موتها طلب الدنيا بعمل الآخرة. The death of hearts is seeking the worldly with next worldly actions. And this applies to the people of knowledge and the people of service themselves, but also applies to us as a community. Because if we don't take care of the people of knowledge, then they will struggle to uphold the standard of sincerity. And then they won't be able to be of the benefit needed by the community. Right? If the people of service are not supported, right, then they will not be able to uphold the standard of sincerity. يَسِّرُوا وَلَا تُعَسِّرُوا. Make things easy for people. Don't make them difficult. Right? And in these times we have to think very clearly, because the حفظ يعني واحفظ ديننا المحمدي واجعل ختام أمره كما بدي واحفظه يا ربي بحفظ العلماء. Right? That, oh Allah, protect our Muhammadan religion and make its final glory as it was when it began. And protect it, O Lord, by the protection of, and grant it success, by the, once grant success to our Muhammadan religion, وَحْفَظْهُ, and protect it, O Lord, by the protection of our scholars. And one of the things is to protect them by securing the scholars and the students so they can dedicate themselves to service without fear, without worldly insecurities. I say, well, if I set up a Patreon account, I can get enough followers, but then what are they teaching? Whatever will get them more followers. That's very hard to sustain sincerity that way. It's very difficult. Right? Why are people going out on a da'wah trip? Because if someone doesn't do 2 da'wah trips a month, they won't be able to pay their budgets. Then why are they going? Where are they going? How are they going? How are they teaching? What are they saying? Right? What is sought is pure sincerity. That is what's accepted by Allah. وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحِ يَرْفَعُ. And it's the pure action that is raised by Allah. Then there's degrees of admixture. Those are, the asl fiha ar-radd. And the basis of it is that it be rejected. Allah is merciful, and some things, طلبنا العلم لغير الله فأبى العلم أن يكون إلا لله. Sufyan al-Thawri's relator said, we sought knowledge for other than Allah, but Allah refused for knowledge to be for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That's part of Allah's ghira for people are tested and tried, etc. And those who persevere, very often their intentions get spiritually washed into sincerity. But there'll be a lot of struggle and suffering in the midst of it. So this requires a lot of thought at the individual level, and these 2 pillars of religious knowledge and service of the religious community require serious thought about sincerity. And inshallah, post Ramadan, we're opening up online the Certificate in Islamic Activism as one of the learning streams at Seekers, which is a 6-part series that can be covered at your own pace for on this issue of that service has to be with certain values and ethos. وغيرها كله وغيرها وغيرها كله رياء. Everything besides this, everything besides what is done for the sake of Allah is insincere. Where you sought worldly gain, not purely for the sake of Allah, is insincere. وإن كان إعلام الغير باعثا على مجرد الإظهار للاقتداء ونحوه من النيات الصالحة لا على نفس العمل فليس برياء. Right? And if informing others of a good deed is done merely for manifesting the deed so that one may be followed, for example, and other good intentions, then not the driving reason why you did the action, then this is not showing off. So for example, someone gave, just today, subhanAllah, of course he doesn't want it to be known, so I'm not going to mention who it is, you probably don't know him, but there's someone of prominence in North America who decided to support one of the Syrian scholars for a whole year. He made that commitment through the Islamic Scholars Fund. Now let's say if this person did this, right, then told others about it, right? Now if they did it and the purpose why they did it so they could tell others, this is riya, right? Why? Because why was the telling of the good action? If it was for the sake of creation, it's showing off. Or if there's a mixed intention, it's also showing off, insincerity. But if they told another for a good intention, right, so they did the action for the sake of Allah, right? They supported one of the scholars, so they gave in charity to support one of the scholars, they gave zakat to support one of the scholars, for example, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And that's the driving intention. And then how you're going to seek the pleasure of Allah? One multiplies one's intentions. And one should in all one's giving. But with that, then one sees, so what would the intentions be in supporting a scholar? Right? To give one's charity, so one's give one's charity or one's zakat for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then how you will seek the pleasure of Allah? Firstly, your personal intention to fulfill my duty to Allah, right? To have gratitude for my wealth, right? To fulfill the right the needy and deserving have over my wealth. But then the person you're supporting, if you can give to those who have benefit, then you think, okay, because the charity of greatest benefit is that which has lasting reward, which has wider benefit, or lifts greater distress. So you said, by supporting this scholar, for example, I will facilitate for them I will honor the inheritors of the Prophet ﷺ. I'll facilitate for them to dedicate themselves to teaching others, to writing, to spreading beneficial knowledge now and in the future. And you think of the many intentions. You can have a dozen good intentions in one act. And إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, actions are by their intentions. وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى, and each person shall have all that they intended. Right? They say, مَنْ فُتِحَ لَهُ بَابُ النِّيَّةِ فُتِحَتْ لَهُ أَبْوَابُ الْخَيْرِ. Whoever the door of intention is opened for, the doors of good are opened for them. Right? This from the many meanings. They say, أنفاس المخلصين أعظم من أعمال الغافلين. It said the breathing of the sincere are far greater in reward than the acts of worship of the heedless. Right? Because you can breathe for the sake of Allah, right? And there's tremendous reward in it. Because you breathe for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, conscious that your life is a gift. Your existence is a gift, your life is a gift. Your body is a gift, your heart is a gift, the breath is a gift. All that you'll be able to do through that breath is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have resolve through that breathing to be, to uphold faith and gratitude and to do good, religious and worldly. That breathing is far greater than mountains of worship done. That I am worshipping, I am doing dhikr, I am this, I am that. It's like as if you're saying, Subhani ma a'zama sha'ni, glory be to me, how great I am. Nasallallahu al-afiyah. Right? So, if the worldly gain that one is seeking, right, like telling another, is not why you did the action, but was done for a good intention, such as what? You have a good project. You have a good project. You started an orphanage for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, why do you tell other people about it? It's very dangerous. It can be dangerous. Doesn't mean you don't tell other people about it. But you showcase it. Why would you showcase it? Let's say the orphanage is fully funded. Why would you showcase it? Why would showcasing it be greater than in reward than not showcasing it? And how? Are these guys there? Are they in the Zoom? No. You set it up? Okay. Yeah, you could talk about, for a number of reasons, right? One is to seek the pleasure of Allah by encouraging others to do it, right? وَجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا, make us exemplars, imams for the mindful, right? That's niyatul iqtida lillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because if you do a good, right? But then why do you say, but you have to check your intention. They say, الظهور يكسر الظهور. Zuhur, being manifest, breaks backs. Right? The word for dhahr, the back, is from that which is manifest, because it's your back that manifests you, makes you upright and prominent. Otherwise you're like, you won't be seen. But zuhur is being manifest. Right? الظهور يكسر الظهور. Being manifest breaks backs. But when you do that for the sake of Allah, but that sake of Allah cannot just be a veneer, because that is either a mixed intention or a fake intention. It has to be khalis. It has to be pure for the sake of Allah. Right? So why am I doing this? And that is the muhasabah. You have to take yourself to account beforehand. Right? And when pure, this is a blessed intention. This is a blessed intention. Right? Right? So one doesn't leave a good deed for the sake of others, but the practical thing is that anytime there's worldly gain in a religious work that is sought for oneself or for the action itself, the only safety is in sincerity. The only safety is in sincerity. And one can break this down and make it very complicated, but the summary is, The only sincere safety is through sincerity. And those of you who have the commentary, there's some really nice furu' here, details about if there's insincerity in one's obligatory acts of worship, in one's sunnah acts of worship, in one's nafil, mixed intentions and so on. And there's a nice discussion. Ibn Abdeen, and we're going to look at some of that later. But in one's religious works, but the guiding principle is that the only safety is when you act, before you act in religious works, especially, begin with this intention of, I am doing this for the sake of Allah. Right? And think of how you will seek the pleasure of Allah. Right? Right? What am I doing? Purposeful action. What am I doing? I am praying. Why am I praying? For the sake of Allah. How will I seek the pleasure of Allah myself? Right? Make a habit of defining what, why, and how. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? And how will I fulfill that intention? So I am praying for the sake of Allah. How? That's the why. So I am praying my asr. That's what. Why am I praying? For the sake of Allah. How am I praying for the sake of Allah? How? For the pleasure of Allah, for the closeness of Allah. How? By praying in accordance with the sunnah. And you make your multiple intentions there. And you train yourself in this, and this is then if you are in a position where sincerity is tested, you're in public, you get a thought. Let's say you don't pray your sunnahs normally. You're in front of other people. Should you do your sunnah or not? You get this thought, let me do my sunnah. Should you do it or not?
Yes, if you're sincere.
Right? Acting for other than Allah is insincerity. But leaving an action for other than Allah is also insincerity. Sincerity is that you be freed of the two. So anytime you get an inclination to the good, what should you do? إذا فتح الله لك بابا من الطاعة فالزمه. If Allah opens a door to obey Him, stick to the door. But what do? Be purposeful, right? القصد تبلغ. Remain purposeful, and you'll attain. So you get this thought, there's people around. You could do it insincerely. You say, well, I'm going to look bad. There's Uncle Jamil. If I pray, he'll notice from Zubaydah that I'm probably a good person for Zubaydah to marry. Let me not just do 2 rak'ahs before Asr, I'll do 6. So no. You get a thought. That's one of the benefits of good company. You're with good company. You see other people doing good, you get an inclination to do the good. But you could make you insincere. You try to impress them. But حرر نيتك. Refine your intention. How? You ask yourself 3 questions. What am I doing? I'm praying the sunnah of Asr. Why am I praying it? For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How am I going to make it for the sake of Allah? By doing something pleasing to Allah. By acting on the sunnah of the messenger. By expressing gratitude to Allah. Right? By taking heed from good company. Because who has facilitated the good company? It's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And any time one's intention is tested, one is in front of people, you have to double up. This applies to your acts of devotion. It also applies to your acts of service. There is no khatib for Friday. So everybody's sitting and they see you and they say, Sidi Hamza, can you give the khutbah? What would you say? And again, acting for the sake of other than Allah is riya. But leaving it for the sake of Allah is also riya. Al-ikhlas an yu'afiyaka Allahu anhuma. The question to ask is, the sincere act is the one done for Allah. Right? That where is the good? Then one follows it. Right? But that's also where, if one does not have, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَكُونُوا مَعَ الصَّادِقِينَ, be with those who are true. Right? Because what is the right response in different times is different. One of the great du'at of our times, I was with him when he was visiting Toronto, and he was actually visiting the old Seekers, and a brother was reading to him from the Book of Assistance, and it had the section on Jumu'ah. And then I asked for permission to ask a question. I said, these were the adab of Jumu'ah. What are the adab of a bad Jumu'ah? He said, what's a bad Jumu'ah? I said, a Jumu'ah in which the khutbah is done, where nothing of benefit is said in the Jumu'ah, in the khutbah, or things that would turn people away from the deen are said in the Jumu'ah. I said, how bad could it get? I said, sometimes they can say things that are religiously munkar, that there's no, that it would cause clear harm and it's clearly incorrect. So he discussed the details of that. He asked, where are the brothers? Ayn al-ikhwa? Where are the brothers? Where are the students of knowledge? I said, felt embarrassed for them. He said, many of them feel that they're not sincere enough. They feel it's from humility not to put themselves forward. He said, هذا ليس التواضع. هذا ليس بتواضع. This is not humility. هذه ضاعة. This is humiliation. It's humiliation where the pleasure of Allah is in a certain direction and then you walk away from it. Is that humility? And I've never seen this man, one of the great du'at of our time, be this upset. I've spent time with him in different parts of the world. He says, this is not humiliation. This is not humility. Right? Humility is that you seek the pleasure of Allah and you have a sense of how low you are in the presence of Allah. Humility is not to walk away from the good, is not to walk away from where Allah seeks you to be. If people need a benefit and you can fulfill it, and then for you not to do so. He said, but they fear insincerity. He said, if they fear insincerity, then do the right thing and do it for the right reason. And struggle with your intention. Recognize that you fall short. That is humility. That you do the right thing. That what will be pleasing to Allah. Do it with the right intention. And then realize that I'm falling short in fulfilling what is pleasing to Allah. I am falling short in my sincerity. And then strive to do it better, to be more fit to do it. Strive to make your intention more pure. Connect with those who can help you. Stand up. Right? And this is why so many of us have to wake up. Say, I'm not good enough. So you don't serve. Of course, it doesn't mean you go off and seek prestige, because that's ruin. But many students of knowledge have been seeking knowledge for ages. And people are losing their faith. People are going astray. the people who complain about bad khutbahs, and there's some Twitter accounts, Dear Khatib, and so on. Shame on the people who don't do those things, because are you giving the khutbah? No. You should be able to give the khutbah by now. And many of those people who comment on how bad the khutbah was, shame on you. Right? It's not by you seeking prestige, but if you can be of service. Nobody's saying go and seek the biggest masjid in town. High schools don't have people to give them khutbahs. Colleges don't have people to give khutbahs. Right? So there's a young man, subhanallah, he came to Canada a couple of years ago and kind of raw around all kinds of edges and rough. But he's kind of naturally loud. So he was asked to give khutbah. He thought it was hilarious. So what I did, I asked him to consult one of my friends who's a respected scholar. I knew what he would say, right? Because we have common teachers. And he shocked the young brother. He said, of course you have to give khutbah. If there's if there's a benefit that's not fulfilled, then do it, but make your intention sincere. And he gave him some guidelines. And one of the ways of safety in this is remain under the shadow of the people of sincerity. اتبع سبيل من أناب إليه. Follow the way of those who have turned penitently to me. Seek scholars and teachers and mentors who have uprightness, sound religious understanding, who have palpable sincerity, and scholars who are exemplars, but also teachers, mentors of uprightness and good character and sincerity. And always consult them. Always consult them. Never take a step outside a trodden path of people of inaba, who are turning to Allah. Even worldly decisions, consider the worldly dimensions of it, but make a habit to consult those who are sincere, who are true to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Have friends like that. لا تصاحب إلا مؤمنا. Keep the close company of true believers. ولا يأكل طعامك إلا تقي. And let your eating companions be the mindful servants of Allah. And if you do so, and these are the people who you should be consulting and looking at how they make decisions. And when you are faced with choices, consult on the basis of what will be pleasing to Allah. Istafti qalbak. Seek an answer from your heart. What is your heart? Your heart is the faculty within you that seeks the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It applies in these life decisions, but then the same things can be inculcated in your worldly decisions. Because sincerity in religious matters is an obligation. But in worldly matters, sincerity is recommended. You're missing out on opportunity. You're going to work every day. What a foolish thing to do without sincerity. You spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week doing something. You don't have to have sincerity in your work. You just work because it pays you the bills. What a miserable life. You're working from home. Sit in front of the laptop. If you were to think, you would be miserable and cry. And many people get miserable the older they get through their work. Ghafla, heedlessness is a mercy. Because they stop and think, why am I doing this? Right? Why am I doing this? Because it makes no sense. But when you sit down and begin your work every day, renew your intention. This is for the sake of Allah. I'm working to seek the pleasure of Allah. Whatever line of work you have. How am I seeking the pleasure of Allah? By fulfilling the divine command to seek lawful provision, to seek a lawful way of earning, to provide for yourself and your family in a lawful way. To be of benefit to Allah's creation. خَيْرُ النَّاسِ أَنْفَعُهُمْ لِلنَّاسِ. Doesn't matter. You're working on a startup. You're a janitor. Imagine if nobody cleaned up. These are all great acts of service. Do it for the sake of Allah. And pause and think of what are my intentions in what I'm, firstly is to fulfill your duty to Allah Himself. In anything that we do, we are fulfilling certain duty. By drinking a cup of water, you're fulfilling a duty to Allah, which is to preserve your life. Right? That's an obligation. To give your body its rights. Right? That cup of water fulfills an obligation. But then, through the action itself, how will you seek the pleasure of Allah? Right? How you will be of service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. Unless the work is unlawful, you are actually or potentially benefiting others. That's from the work itself. Then from what you earn, the good intentions that you have. By earning this, I want to seek the pleasure of Allah by clearing my debts, by spending in the ways of good, by taking care of my family, by giving in charity, by so many other things. Right? But then that'll change, that'll adorn your work as well, because you'll work in a different way. So even in worldly matters where doing it for the sake of Allah is not obligatory, you're missing out. And also, of course, you're making yourself susceptible to all kinds of religious and spiritual and worldly harm. Next lesson, we're going to look at how insincerity and showing off is expressed. And that people show off by their appearance, by their dress, by their words, by their actions, and by how they conduct themselves with friends and guests and others. So we're going to look at that بإذن الله تعالى. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. Sure.
How can one be sincere in a religious service, such as that of an Imam of a masjid, and intended purely for the sake of Allah, if it is contingent on a salary, such that they would necessarily have to leave their service and find other work, even if secular, to support themselves and their family if the salary were to end? How can it be sincere if its continuation is dependent on worldly gain?
Yeah, that's a tricky thing. That's a tricky thing. So one of the grounding of that is to realize that Allah is merciful, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful, right? So He has made certain matters easier than how we approach them ourselves, right? Right? How we approach them ourselves, right? So, and we'll see some of the criteria for sincerity, right? And Imam al-Ghazali talks extensively about this in the book of sincerity and intention and so on in the Ihya. And the ulama asked the question, is pure sincerity truly possible? Okay? And they say that by yourself, pure sincerity is not possible. Right? Right? Just as you could not possibly reach Allah itself. Like as Ibn Ata'illah says, لو أنك لا تصل إليه بعد فناء مساويك ومحو دعاويك فإنك لن تصل إليه أبدا. Said, if you were not to reach Allah, reach closeness to Allah through pure, sincere slavehood, right? If you could not reach Allah except when you extinguish your blameworthy qualities, فناء مساويك وَمَحْوِ دَعَوِيكَ, and wipe away your false claims, you would never reach him. لكن إن أراد سبحانه أن يوصلك إليه غطى نعتك بنعته وستر وصفك بوصفه فأوصلك إليه بما منه إليك لا بما منك إليه. But if Allah wills to make you reach Him, He covers your quality with His quality and conceals your traits with His traits. So He makes you reach Him by what's from Him to you, not from what is from you to Him. And this is from what our beloved sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam tells us, that from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hadith Qudsi, من تقرب إلي شبرا تقربت منه ذراعا. Whoever draws close to me by a handspan, Allah draws close to by an arm's length. من تقرب إلي ذراعا تقربت منه باعا. And whoever draws close to me by an arm's length, I draw close to by 2 arms lengths. ومن أتاني يمشي. And whoever draws close to me walking, I rush to them. And what is rushing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? Walking to Allah is one makes one's acts of successive approximation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala consistent. Right? That is what we're, but we see from the hadith this notion of successive approximation. Right? We are not able to be sufficiently sincere. We are not able to do fully Allah tells us, وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ. Right? Right? But we approximate. Right? We approximate. Right? We approximate. And if we keep turning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help us refine our intentions, and that's where the divine favor comes. Right? The divine favor comes. And that opening from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It has different names. Right? They refer to it as fayd, right? The divine effulgence, or the fana, that state of extinguishing. Right? Right? Because otherwise, we are majma'un naqa'is. We are the gathering of all shortcomings. Right? Right? As Wali Raslan in Dimashqi says, كُلُّكَ شِرْكٌ خَفِي. Your entirety is hidden. Shirk, right, is hidden insincerity. وَلَنْ يَبِينَ لَكَ التَّوْحِيدِ. And pure divine oneness and the sincerity it entails will not be manifest for you, to you. حَتَّى تَخْرُجَ بِهِ عَنْكَ. Until you leave by Him from yourself. فَتَكُونَ بِهِ. So you are by Him. لَا بِنَفْسِكَ. Not by yourself. Right? And that's why we say, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ. It is you alone we worship. وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ. And it is upon you alone we rely. Because to the extent that you're self-reliant, self-directed, this, you are selfish and you are not sincere. Right? So that's why, so in these things, it requires that, a test of a sincere intention in these things is that you would be committed to doing this even if you were not paid. And were it not for extenuating circumstances, you would continue to do it even if you were not paid. And a good example of that, last year, Seekers had funding challenges. One of the dear brothers who was involved in Seekers and was part of our staff. We had to let him go. It was very painful. Someone I know and I love, I had to let him go. He said, and even though he was in very difficult financial circumstances, he said, I am going to continue, even if I'm not paid. And for 6, 7, 9 months, he continued doing the same job, the same work as he was doing when he was not, when he was being supported. And he would have, I know him, he would have, but that's rare. That's rare. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him openings in his deen and his dunya and his family and in his wealth and in his seeking of knowledge and in his spiritual path. Right? And that's, and the choices one makes when things are difficult, those are the real choices. Right? So one of the mashayikh, his electricity was cut. I noticed that recently. Because he was doing a pre-fajr ibtihal, like a pre-fajr, suhoor time. And I've gotten to know him, so I joked with him, Sayyidi, you were really munawwar last night. I had to call him after his sunrise. He said it was artificial lighting, because the electricity was cut. So he was shining his cell phone on the book, right, like this. So in a dark room. So I called him and he said, Alhamdulillah. He thought it was hilarious. I said, Sidi, wain al-kahruba? He says, Mafi. I said, why? He said, yes, Sidi, we haven't paid the bills for since January or whatever, like several months. It was before the coronavirus. I said, how are things? He said, Sidi, and at that point, what is his concern? It's not how he'll pay his electricity. I said, what about the rent? He said, see, he's not paid the electricity bill, he's not paid the rent. Actually, but what was his concern at that time? He said, see, our institute, we haven't paid the rent for 3 months. And we may not be able to serve the students. Right? He's not concerned about the fact that he's on the verge of eviction. His concern is what's going to happen to the institute, because now they're threatening that they'll take away the institute. That's sincere. This sheikh was forced to migrate from Syria when he got to, and at that time when people, so many were leaving Syria at that time of the ulama and so on, we were sort of keeping, okay, how are our teachers, are they safe, etc. The sheikh got to Istanbul. I said, okay, has he settled? Has he found work? Immediately he opened a Dar Quran. He was still, him and his family, living with somebody else. But before securing a job for himself, before securing the basic needs of his family, the concern was, I have an amana of spreading religious guidance. How do I do that? And they opened an institute, because they secured funding for the institute, and they made it free. So, لا يتاجر بالدين. We don't trade in deen. So then I asked one of my good friend Sheikh Mu'min Hassan, so what's going on with them? He says, you know how he is, right? The institute opened because they secured some funding for that. He didn't have a salary, because the concern was, let's get things set up, let's help others. That's sincerity. But one of the ways is, they say that that's why one of the things that it requires is suhbah, to keep the company of the sincere. Right? And to follow on their footsteps. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, guide us to the path that is straight. Sirat alladhina an'amta alayhim. Because the path that is straight, walking it alone is almost impossible. Because you are weak, and not just the outward forces around us, but the forces within, right, are powerful against the straight path. But صراط الذين أنعمت, the path of those you bestowed, blessed before us. What is that? That is that is صراط رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. What is the path of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم? ما عليه ورثة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. What the inheritors of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم are upon. How do I find them? Right? لا يزال طائفة من أمتي ظاهرين على الحق. There will always remain a group in my community manifest on the truth. Right? لا يضرهم من يخالفهم. They will be not unaffected by those who go against them. ولا من يخذلهم, nor affected by those who put them down. حتى يأتي أمر الله, until the command of Allah comes. وهم على ذلك, and they're upon that. So it's very clear, right? So 2 years ago, when I visited Jordan, I visited one of the great female scholars of our time, one of the great righteous that I've ever met. He says, Faraz, people think these are difficult times, but all of history is the same, basically. There are the people who are with the prophets and the people who are with the shaitan. And the middle, they are confused people. Some are closer to the way of the prophets, some are closer to the way of the shaitan, and some waver. Our responsibility is to call people to the way of the prophets, because that's a circle of Allah's pleasure and mercy. He says nothing changes under the sun. It's always the same story. There's Hizb al-Rahman and the Hizb al-Shaytan. And then there's the confused middle. And yassiru wa la tu'assiru. Make things easy for people. Make it easy for them to be on the way of the prophets. Make it easy for yourself. Right? They say إنما يؤخذ الإخلاص من المخلصين والأدب من المتأدبين. Right? Since, sincerity is found by looking at the sincere, through the sincere. And adab is found by the people of adab. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى تيسير ذلك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. Any other question?